there is a threshold limit. Beyond that amount of turnover or sales of either your goods or services, you have to pay tax. But below that, you don't have to pay any tax. You will not get registered. Okay. So let's understand that. A person having an aggregate turnover of not exceeding 20 lakhs is exempt from GST. And this limit is 10 lakhs for northeastern states and Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. So if you are doing a turnover above 20 lakhs, anywhere except the hilly areas or northeast, then as a businessman, you are not supposed to pay GST. Okay, and because there are certain more, the aggregate turnover includes taxable supplies, exempt supplies, stock transfers, exports, etc. So all your sales will be counted to calculate the 20 lakh rupees limit. It is calculated on all India basis and of a person who has the PAN for income tax. So it is for aggregate and it is calculated on all India basis of a taxable person. If GST is payable under the reverse charge mechanism, this exempt is not applicable. So that means it is applicable to everyone. But where there is a provision called reverse charge mechanism, if it is applicable to you, then this whole is not applicable. You have to pay tax, whatever is your turnover. Now, normally it is a supplier of goods or services who is supposed to pay tax. The recipient doesn't have to pay tax. Of course, he suffers the tax, but the tax which is paid to the government is by the supplier of goods and services. But in some cases, it is not the supplier of goods or services, but the recipient has to pay tax. Okay, fine. For example, one case, suppose, I am taking services of a lawyer. Okay, now a lawyer may not be registered under the GST Act. So I am taking his services. I have to pay tax. Okay, I'll explain this more in detail when we come to the reverse charge mechanism. Okay, exemption limit for registration and payment of GST has been revised to 40 lakhs and 20 lakhs for supplier of goods. So now, of course, there are two components: supplies of goods and supply of services. All are called supply in GST now. So either you are dealing in goods or you are a professional or you are supplying services. Okay, it can be either of you in the business. Now, if you are supplier of goods, then the limit has been raised to 40 lakhs. Now the present limit is 40 lakhs. Now when it got about 2 years back, but 40 लाख अगर आप goods and service goods करते हो तो 40 लाख की लिमिट है. अगर आपने 35 लाख से गुड बेचे हैं पिछले साल, okay, and you have been always below that threshold, the moment you cross 40, you have to get yourself, registered and pay taxes. And this limit goes to 20 lakhs for hilly areas, which is 10 lakhs for goods. Okay, but for services, the limit has remained the same. Let me just complete one more slide and then, because that will complete the whole law. Okay, this law. हाँ, चलो ये खत्म हो गया. बताइए. What is the question?
फर्स्ट चीज पे ज्यादा पहले तो मुझे 20 लाख है ना कि उसमें जीएसटी है. ये टैक्स की रिटर्न की बात हो रही है जीएसटी.
हम अभी वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट जीएसटी. ओके,
हम कब पे करते हैं सर?
हाँ जी, आपने नहीं, मैं बात कर रहे हैं फ्रॉम अ बिजनेस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. Okay, suppose I am a businessman. I am running a business. Okay, I'm running a gym. Okay, and gym is what? Supply of services. They're not supplying goods. So either you are a service provider or you are a goods provider. Okay, you can be any of the two. 99% cover इसमें केस हो जाएंगे. So either you are a goods provider or a service provider. Suppose he is a gym service provider. The limit is how much? 20 lakhs. If suppose his turnover is more than 20 lakhs, then he has to charge GST on the invoices of whatever invoice is raising on his clients. नहीं, वो अभी हम उसकी बात ही नहीं कर रहे हैं. वो तो आप 20 दिन के अंदर पे करते हो, वो नेक्स्ट स्टेप है. आप अगर आप बिजनेसमैन हो, आप छोटे बिजनेसमैन हो, ऊपर लिखा है स्मॉल टैक्सेबल पीपल. You can be either a chartered accountant or provider of good or advocate, or you are selling some goods. You are having a shop and you are selling goods. So you can be in any category. या तो आप goods बेचते हो या आप services बेचते हो. You are like a barber shop. They are providing services. They are not selling goods. So there is a separate limit for both the classes of business people. After how much amount they have to charge GST from the customers. अब एक आदमी है जो सिर्फ 40 लाख के गुड्स बेच रहा है, 39 lakhs के बेच रहा है, he will not raise an invoice on you, he is not going to charge you GST. Okay, but when you are going to a good supplier who is having a 50 lakhs rupees sale, so he will be raising an invoice and charging you GST
So that 40 lakh sale is one go sale?
per annum.
Per annum.
पर annum. और जब क्रॉस हो गई तो फिर आपको जीएसटी लग गया, अगले साल आपने 30 लाख भी करा तो फिर भी आपको, अब एक बार आपको एप्लीकेबल हो गया तो यू हैव टू गेट योर सेल्फ रजिस्टर, नाउ यू आर अ रजिस्टर्ड डीलर एंड यू हैव टू चार्ज द जीएसटी. समटाइम मैं उसको वर्ड सर्विस टैक्स बोल देता हूँ बिकॉज अर्लियर सर्विस टैक्स, बट जीएसटी. ओके, तो आपको जीएसटी पे करना पड़ेगा इवन इफ योर लिमिट फॉल्स इन द सब्सिक्वेंट ईयर. But once you are covered under GST, then you have to raise a GST invoice. We are going to talk about what kind of invoice you have to raise, and you have to charge GST from your clients or customers. अगर आपकी 40 लाख से नीचे की सेल है और आप गुड सप्लायर हो तो कोई आपको जीएसटी का इनवॉइस रेज करने की जरूरत नहीं है. यू आर एग्जाम्प्ट फ्रॉम जीएसटी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल सपोज आई एम प्रोवाइडिंग सर्विस, आई एम अ प्रोफेसर. ओके, नहीं जिस साल हो जाएगी उस दिन से आपका हाँ, आपको इमीडिएटली रजिस्ट्रेशन कराना पड़ेगा. आपको जो भी टाइम मिलता है ब्रीदिंग टाइम वो मिल जाएगा, वो तो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव बात है. ओके, हम उस पर आए नहीं कि हम 40 लाख से ऊपर हो गया, अब क्या करें, वी आर नॉट डिस्कसिंग. हाँ, वो आप जीएसटी नंबर तो आप पोर्टल में डालिए, विद इन 24 आवर्स आपको जीएसटी नंबर मिल जाता है. हाँ, उससे पहले रजिस्ट्रेशन करने की जरूरत नहीं. फर्स्ट चार्ज मैकेनिज्म where GST is normally payable by the supplier of goods or services. In some cases, however, the recipient is liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. If the tax is payable under the reverse charge mechanism, it has to be paid in cash, rather through bank or whatever. Cash means you are paying online, internet banking. Okay? Okay. Input credit cannot be utilized to pay the GST liability under reverse charge mechanism. Yeah. हाँ जी, हाँ हाँ, तो भी नहीं टैक्स लगेगा ना. वो तो टैक्स तो सिर्फ थ्रेशोल्ड है. आप तो जो सामान बेच रहे हो सब पे जीएसटी लगता है, सब जीएसटी कवरेज होती है. लेकिन उन लोगों को जिनकी सेल 40 लाख से नीचे की है और वो गुड्स बेचते हैं, उनको टैक्स देने की जरूरत नहीं है, उनको टैक्स कलेक्ट करने की जरूरत नहीं है. ओके, लेकिन उसका ड्रॉबैक होता है, अब हम आगे चलेंगे पता चलेगा. क्योंकि सिंस I am giving goods and I am not paying any GST, I am not collecting any GST. लेकिन मैं जब खरीदूंगा किसी से तो उस पर तो जीएसटी लग गया. तो हाँ हाँ, अब मैं आपको बिल्कुल, लेट मी जस्ट कंप्लीट. आई एम सपोज अ स्मॉल टाइम गुड्स सप्लायर. ओके, my sale is below 40 lakhs, but I am also buying goods which are suffering GST. I won't be allowed input credit. So ultimately वो जब मैं सामान बेच रहा हूं वो ऑलरेडी जीएसटी लगा हुआ सामान आपको बेच रहा हूं, तो आपने तो जीएसटी पे ही कर दिया अल्टीमेटली. ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट. समझो मोटा मोटा क्या, अभी कोई गवर्नमेंट का रेवेन्यू लीकेज नहीं हो रहा है. गवर्नमेंट इज नॉट लूजिंग एनीथिंग बिकॉज इफ आई एम अ 40 lakhs this thing, so if I am buying raw material and it is suffered a GST, so I won't be allowed input credit. Okay, so that means I am selling costly. उसमें जीएसटी ऑलरेडी लग चुका है इनपुट पे. हाँ, मेरी वैल्यू एडिशन पे बच रहा सिर्फ. ओके, फाइन. इट इज बेसिकली टू पीपल एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कन्वीनियंस के लिए. आपने 5 लाख की सेल करी, 10 लाख की सेल करी, आप सब जीएसटी के दायरे में आ जाओगे तो सबको फिर जो है इट विल बी हैसल फॉर द स्मॉल प्लेयर. हाँ हाँ, सफरिंग तो है. It is a kind, because his goods are costly, but when he's selling, he's claiming that part of his profit from the other person. So he's also not, whatever GST he's paying, he's not, not going, it is a cost in his pocket. अब वो सामान बेचेगा तो अपने सामान को तो महंगा करके बेचेगा ना, तो जो लोग खरीद रहे हैं उनको भी पास ऑन तो हो गया. हाँ हाँ, आप कह रहे हो कि एक शॉप है जिसकी 40 लाख से ऊपर है, जिसकी 40, ऐसा बताओ ना। अब एक की 40 लाख है, लेट मी जस्ट, आई एम जस्ट टेकिंग योर एग्जांपल, लेट मी एक्सप्लेन। अब 40 लाख रुपए की में से नीचे की है, तो आप मुझसे खरीद रहे हो, तो अब मैंने आपको 120 रुपए का सामान दिया, ओके। घर कीमत मेरी 100 थी, उसमें मैंने सपोज 20 रुपए जीएसटी पे करा था इनपुट पे, तो आई एम इंक्लूडिंग माई प्रॉफिट, आई एम चार्जिंग 120, ओके। नाउ द अदर गाइस जिसका जाओगे, तो वो आपको 100 रुपए का इनवॉइस रेज करेगा, उस पर 20% जीएसटी लगा के 120 का ही रेज करेगा। Fine. So ultimately, it boils to the same thing. You are paying the same price, whether you are buying from a small timer or a big timer. Of course, I'm not going to penny penny reconciliation, but whatever GST he has paid on the inputs, he is claiming you are part of his cost. और दूसरा वाला जो है आपको जीएसटी इनवॉइस पे लगा के दे रहा है, बस यही अंतर है। हाँ हाँ, एब्सोल्युटली, वो अलग बात, वो अलग चीज, चलो हाँ हाँ, या ओके। हाँ चलो, अब आते हैं, वो सिर्फ क्या है कि कितने सारे लोग हो जाते हैं जो 10 लाख 20 लाख की सेल कर रहे हैं, उनको बाहर रखा गया है just for administrative, because the government doesn't also want ki so many people are cramping up the GST portal and the GST can be, hang up in the process. So we are in a transition phase, and this exemption is always given to the small guys, whether we are in transition or we have even settled. Okay, let me just इसको थोड़ा और चलते हैं, इसमें काफी सारी क्लैरिफिकेशन आएंगे अभी। इनपुट क्रेडिट कैन नॉट बी यूटिलाइज टू पे, ठीक है। अगर आप रिवर्स चार्ज मैकेनिज्म इज एप्लीकेबल, normally the supplier of goods and services is supposed to pay ultimate tax to the government, which he collects from his customer, okay. But in case of reverse charge mechanism, it is the recipient who pays the tax. Now there will be some examples so we can understand. However, once the tax is paid by the recipient, and input under RCM, input tax credit is available to him if he is otherwise, okay, sorry, can you read, sir, एक second, पढ़ेंगे लास्ट में क्या लिखा है। However,
once tax is paid by the recipient with the input under RCM,
recipient on the input, on input,
on input under RCM, input tax credit is available to him.
हाँ
If he is otherwise eligible for tax input credit.
हाँ, ऐसा है कि suppose I have taken a services from a lawyer, okay. I am a big businessman. I have taken a services of a lawyer. Now the service provider is whom? The lawyer. But he is not going to charge on his bill GST. Rather, I am going to pay the GST for whatever services I have taken from the lawyer and going to deposit with the government authority. But I can take the input credit of the GST which I have paid on the lawyer's bill. अगर मेरा फाइनल प्रोडक्ट टैक्सेबल है, तो मैं जितना टैक्स गवर्नमेंट को पे करा उसमें से उसका क्रेडिट ले लूंगा, ओके। अभी जब हम एग्जांपल्स करेंगे तो ये और क्लियर हो जाएगा, ओके। हाँ हाँ हाँ, बिल्कुल वही, हम मैं जो दे रहा हूं उसका इनपुट क्रेडिट लूंगा। अभी एक्चुअली देयर विल बी लॉट ऑफ होस्ट ऑफ क्वेश्चंस व्हिच विल बी कवरिंग टू कवर ऑल दिस कंसेप्ट, ओके। So look at this, supplier of goods and services, he supplies goods to the receiver of goods and services, and he raises an invoice for goods and services, and then GST is paid by the receiver to the supplier, and supplier pays to the government, okay.
Supplier of goods and services, he supplies goods to the receiver and receiver service to the receiver, and he is paying the price to the supplier, okay, and the GST is paid by the receiver of goods and services to the government.
So this is called reverse charge mechanism.
Supplier in this case doesn't charge.
इस पर बड़ा क्लियर है, बता दो, इसमें कोई डाउट है?
In this second case, supplier doesn't charge GST to the receiver.
सप्लायर
Doesn't charge the GST to the supplier in the costing of.
हाँ, नहीं, वो फिर जो उसका सर्विस है उसमें जीएसटी लगा के और जीएसटी गवर्नमेंट को जमा करा दे। इसमें जैसे मेरे को सपोज 1 लाख रुपए का मिला, अब लॉयर की सर्विस ली, उसने 1 लाख का दिया और मैंने उस पर 18% लगाया और 18% गवर्नमेंट को दे दिया, और 18% का मुझे इनपुट क्रेडिट मिल जाएगा मेरे को, ना नॉट इनकम टैक्स में, जीएसटी में ही। हाँ जी, आपने 1 लाख रुपए का इनवॉइस रेज करा, हाँ नहीं, ऐसा नहीं, आपने 1 लाख रुपए का इनवॉइस रेज करा, आप जीएसटी चार्ज ही नहीं करते क्योंकि आप तो अनरजिस्टर्ड डीलर हैं, या आपको जीएसटी लगता ही नहीं है, हाँ? तो फिर आप रिवर्स चार्ज मैकेनिज्म में नहीं आओगे बाबा। दिस इज, मैं वही तो कह रहा हूं, अब आगे चलेंगे तो इसका और प्रोविजन है। This provision is applicable only to the unregistered dealers. Okay.
लेकिन आपका कंपनी बोले में
हाँ अभी चल रहे हैं ना सर, हम पहले तो पूरा लॉ तो कर ले। आपके क्वेश्चंस एक्चुअली होता है बिफोर इवन अंडरस्टैंडिंग द लॉ, पूरा लॉ हम देख लेंगे तब आपको समझ में आ जाएगा। जो आप बोल रहे थे, मैं तो सोच रहा था कि आपने 1 लाख का रेंज करा, आपने हाँ एब्सोल्युटली। अब वो आगे कंप्लीट हो रहा है, अभी हम चलेंगे। मैं पहले तो नहीं बता दूंगा ना, कहीं ना कहीं अगली स्लाइड में बताऊंगा। अभी पहुंचने दो सर, सॉरी फॉर दैट। ओके, applicability provisions with as per the new provisions, instead of coverage of all the registered person, now the government shall specify the classes of registered persons who shall be liable to pay tax. अच्छा, ये registered लोगों के लिए भी applicable है, but not all. But next, as per the new provision, instead of coverage of all the taxable supply of goods or services of both, the government shall specify the categories of goods or services or both, where the reverse charge mechanism is applicable when the goods or services or both is received from an unregistered person. Okay. Now, इसमें क्योंकि जब ये law आया था, there was a lot of confusion. So, government says, first of all, this law is applicable to only the people who are unregistered. Registered के लिए they will specify. Okay. Fine. So, आगे चलते हैं. Reverse charge. Now, sir, आप पढ़िए, गर्मी सी हो रही है. Just read.
Under this mechanism, GST is taken on goods or services procured from unregistered dealers by the buyer and deposited with the government.
रेगुलेटर इसके बाद रेगुलेटर ऑन है,
ये
आप रेगुलेटर चेक हाँ फिर चलिए।
गर्मी नहीं है? ओके, चलिए सर।
Under this mechanism, GST on goods or services procured from unregistered dealers by the buyer and deposited with the government.
ओके, नेक्स्ट।
This is an anti-tax evasion measure to ensure the transaction by unregistered people don't
पे
escape
टैक्स,
tax.
हाँ, डोंट एस्केप टैक्स। आगे।
In a normal transaction, the supplier of goods or service charges the tax and pays to the government. But in this case, the responsibility reverses and falls on the buyer.
बायर्स। अब देखते हैं किस किस के लिए एप्लीकेबल है। Who are the people on whom the RCM is applicable? ओके, ऊपर से पढ़िए, टॉप से।
Services covered under reverse charge mechanism, RCM under GST. Services provided by an individual, advocate or firm of advocates by way of legal services.
So whenever you are taking a legal, advice, and he's raising a bill, who is an individual or advocate. So in this case, reverse charge mechanism is applicable. Okay, fine. And I'll just show you that also. A live case later on. Maybe next time there is a live case. I'll show you how we are doing it. How we are taking legal services and then, paying tax to the government as a reverse charge mechanism. Next.
Services provided by a goods transport agency in respect of transportation of goods by road.
Generally, when you're in the good transport agencies also, they are the people who are normally not registered. So it is basically the person who is hiring the good transport agencies for moving the goods. So they are supposed to pay the tax. Okay, because they are the big people and the GTAs are always smaller firms. Next.
Taxable services provided by any person who is located in a non-taxable territory and received by any person located in the taxable territory.
So इसमें भी होगा, जो नॉन टैक्सेबल एरिया से आ रहा है माल और टैक्सेबल एरिया में पहुंच रहा है, तो उसका जीएसटी जो होगा वो टैक्सेबल एरिया में पे होगा, बिकॉज दैट पर्सन कैन नॉट चार्ज यू जीएसटी बिकॉज ही इज इन द एरिया वेयर देयर इज नो जीएसटी एप्लीकेबिलिटी. ओके, आगे.
Services provided by an insurance agent to any person carrying on insurance business.
So these are the categories which have been listed by the government. अभी ये listed है. Fine. Is that clear? Okay. Now we come to the second part. Okay. Composition scheme under GST. Now it says that there are certain people who are having a turnover of almost like 1.5 crores or lesser. तो उनके लिए एक नया provision. Just read it.
Who can opt for composition scheme? Who is eligible for GST composition scheme? Business with an annual aggregate turnover up to 1.5 crore can opt into the composition scheme. The turnover of all business with the same PAN has to be added up to calculate the turnover for the purpose of the composition scheme.
So that means the people who have a turnover of 1.5 crores or less, they can go for GST composition scheme. Okay. So what are the benefits and what are the other things? Let's understand.
Only manufacturers of goods, dealers and restaurants not selling alcohol can opt for the composition scheme.
So this is one. Second,
Service providers can opt into a similar scheme for composition dealers where the total turnover limit is 50 lakhs.
so for goods, it is 1.5 crores. For services, the limit has been brought down to 50 lakhs. अगर आप सर्विस प्रोवाइडर हो तो कॉम्पोजिशन स्कीम में आप 50 लाख से नीचे हो तो यू कैन फॉलो इनटू दैट कैटेगरी. If you are supplying goods, then the limit is maximum limit is 1.5 crores. Okay.
Manufacturer of ice
उप-
cream.
आगे चलिए. ऊपर क्या है?
Note that the following persons are not eligible to opt into the composition scheme.
So these people are not eligible for composition.
Manufacturers of ice cream, pan masala or tobacco. A person making inter-state supply.
So if you are selling from one state to another state, then you can't be under the scheme. Only if it is within the state transaction and your turnover falls below 1.5 crores, if you are a goods provider, if you are a service provider, then 50 lakhs. Okay. But if you are providing goods and service across the state, then you can't opt for this scheme. Okay.
A casual taxable person.
Like a normal, like a person who just and does one or two kinds of transactions. This can be definition. We'll go to the definition. Check.
A non-resident taxable person.
A non-resident taxable person.
A person engaged in supply of non-taxable goods under the GST law.
So he also cannot avail this exemption because उसके goods ही taxable नहीं है. Okay.
A supplier who has exceeded the turnover threshold limit specified for opting into the composition scheme.
The supplier who has exceeded the turnover threshold, so he can't opt into this scheme. Okay.
And businesses which supply goods through an e-commerce
So
operator.
business which supply goods through an e-commerce operator, उनके लिए भी ये composition scheme applicable नहीं है. Suppose I am selling goods through Amazon or any other Flipkart, then this I can't opt for composition scheme. What are the benefits here?
What are the benefits of opting into the composition scheme? The advantages of the composition scheme are easier and lesser number of finances to be followed, returns, maintaining of books of record, issuance of invoices, etc.
So he doesn't have to go through the hassles of the GST, all the formalities of GST law.
Quarterly payment of taxes.
He can pay the tax on a quarterly basis instead of monthly basis. Okay, we'll talk about the monthly basis में कितने दिन के बाद pay करते हैं. We'll come to that.
A limited tax liability.
There is a limited tax liability, but what percentage will come? Because for each category of business, it's separate. Okay,
High liquidity as taxes are at a lower rate.
so he pays a lower tax rate. Okay,
For a limited territory of business, as the dealer is barred from carrying out interstate transactions.
so if he is carrying business outside the state, then he can't go opt for this. Okay, so that's a disadvantage.
No input tax credit is available to composition dealers.
So if you are under a composition scheme, then you will not be allowed any input tax credit. Okay, fine. So आपको input tax credit नहीं मिलेगा, benefit नहीं मिलेगा.
The taxpayer will not be eligible to supply non-taxable goods under GST, such as alcohol and goods through an e-commerce portal.
So that ये भी हो गया एक. अच्छा, अब now this is basically what you are supposed to pay as a composite supplier. If you are a manufacturer or a trader of goods, then you have to pay only 1% tax. Up, you are a person who is having a turnover below 1.5 crores. You don't have to comply with any provisions. You don't have to maintain any books of account. You pay just simply 1% tax on a quarterly basis to the government based on your turnover. If you are manufacturer and trader of goods, if you are a restaurant not serving alcohol, then you have to pay 5%. Like when you go to a restaurant, you pay only 5% tax. For all the inputs he is using, he can't take any credit. You lose the input tax credit, okay, under the scheme, and you pay only 5%. When what happened was when the GST came into being, all the restaurants started charging 18% tax. So then there was a lot of hue and cry in the media that everything has become very costly under the new scheme. The government immediately, they said now they can charge only 5%, but they will lose input credit. Earlier they were charging 18% to the customers, but they were entitled for input tax credit. So they said, okay, you can charge now 5% to the customers, whatever input credit you are paying, you will not be eligible for. So that means actually we are paying the same thing, but on the face of the invoice it looks like there's 5% GST. Okay, fine. Then we have आगे कौन सा है?
Service providers.
Service providers 6%. आगे
Manufacturers of bricks, including building bricks, bricks of fossil means or similar structures or
Okay, so for them it is 6%. So that means I mean more important are 1%, 5% or 6%. Okay, bricks का तो एक अलग से industry है. So they have to pay only this tax, and they can pay the tax on a quarterly basis. Disadvantage, they lose the input tax credit. Okay, so that's the one, and they have to pay taxes only quarterly basis. Time of payment of GST. Okay, now we come to the time of payment of GST. Your question. Okay, आगे.
normally GST is payable when supply is made or when payment is received. Whichever comes earlier.
Okay, so that means if you raise an invoice or when you get the payment, whichever is earlier you have to pay tax. अगर आपने invoice पहले raise कर दिया तो आपको tax देना ही पड़ेगा on the due date. Yeah. हाँ हाँ. हाँ, आपको ऑप्ट करना पड़ेगा स्कीम में. हाँ, पोर्टल में जाएंगे, आप रजिस्ट्रेशन कराएंगे तो विल से दैट यू वांट टू ऑप्ट फॉर अ कंपोजिट लेवी और नॉट. सो यू गो फॉर इट, देन यू विल बी रजिस्टर्ड अंडर दैट till your limits are below the threshold limits of that thing. The moment you cross it, then you become full-fledged. All the rules will be applicable to you. अब re-register करने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती है, but your status changes, but that you have to check. Okay, I can't give you that last mile this thing. मैं एक सेकेंड सर, होम मिनिस्ट्री से फोन आया से ले लें. हेलो. नहीं मैंने नहीं करा. ठीक है, ठीक, ओके. अब वहां से क्वेश्चन आया तो उसका तो आंसर देना ही पड़ेगा. हाँ, रिकॉर्ड हो गया, वो मैं निकाल दूंगा रिकॉर्डिंग से. शी वाज आस्किंग कि कोई दिवाली का कंट्रीब्यूशन तो नहीं पे करा आरडब्ल्यू को. मैंने कहा नहीं, मैंने नहीं किया. सो ओके. ओके, नॉर्मली. हाँ सर, आपका क्वेश्चन था, हो गया. हाँ, वो जो आप कह रहे हैं कि वो क्या होगा, दे आर स्पेसिफिक्स. ओके, आई कांट टेक यू टू द लास्ट माइल. उसके लिए आपको थोड़ा सा मतलब वो प्रैक्टिकल है चीज है. हाँ,
तो क्या आज अगर मैं कुछ काम स्टार्ट कर रहा हूँ तो मैं क्या वेट करूंगा एक साल तक कि मेरे को मेरा रियलाइजेशन होगा मेरा टर्नओवर कितना हो रहा है, और जिस समय मेरा इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न होने की टाइमलाइन आ जाएगी और मेरा टर्नओवर मेरे को पता होगा, उस समय मैं मतलब
नहीं, आपकी जो थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट है ना, जिस दिन आपको लग रहा है कि अब मेरी क्रॉस हो जाएगी, ओके, यू आर वेरी नियर टू दैट, गो फॉर रजिस्ट्रेशन. और आपको लगता है कि मेरी 1.5 करोड़ से कम होगी तो गो फॉर जीएसटी. एंड टिल द टाइम योर लिमिट इज अप टू 1.5 करोड़ तो आप कंपोजिट लेवी में ही हो. उसके बाद जैसे क्रॉस करेंगे देन ऑल द टैक्सेस विल अप्लाई. देयर विल बी सम ब्रीदिंग टाइम व्हिच इज गिवन बाय द लॉ एवरीवेयर. ओके, ये तो है नहीं कि आप अगले दिन से आपको तलवार लग जाएगी, होगा नहीं. तो दैट
रियलाइजेशन होना चाहिए.
हाँ.
लेकिन टर्नओवर में मैं कहां तक बैठ रहा हूं उसके हिसाब से मैं.
Okay, so I'll just give you a parallel law. Under the income tax, you are supposed to pay 90% of your tax as advance tax. क्योंकि आप सब सैलरी क्लास में हैं, आपका तो मंथली टीडीएस कट जाता है. बट इफ यू आर इन अ बिजनेस सेक्टर एंड यू आर डूइंग अ बिजनेस, then you are required to estimate what is going to be your income for the entire year. Okay, fine. And you are supposed to pay 90% of the tax before the year ends in 4 installments. 15th July, 15th September, 15th December, and 15th March. So you have to pay in 4 installments. So they make assessment. Now, suppose according to my assessment, my income was X, but it happens to be X plus something. So I failed to pay 90%. When I file my actual return, I have to pay interest on that difference, which I have, paid less.
This is for a private limited company or a normal?
For normal business also. For a limited company, there are 4 installments. For a private individual proprietor, there are 3 installments. But that's the only difference. But you have to pay entire 90% of taxes before the year ends. So that you have to just estimate everything now.
Sir, one more thing, sir. Like if I'm a service provider and I'm raising a bill to you, you are my service seeker.
Okay.
अब आपको मैं जो इनवॉइस रेज कर रहा हूँ, एक होता है कच्चा इनवॉइस, होता है एक होता है प्रॉपर इनवॉइस।
हाँ
तो आई एम सपोज टू हैव अ जीएसटी नंबर टू हैव दैट इनवॉइस ट्रांजैक्शन बिटवीन अस।
या
तो मेरे को जीएसटी नंबर तो जिस दिन से मैंने काम
नहीं, आपको जिस दिन काम देखो ऐसा है जैसे बिकॉज यू नो आई एम गिविंग माई सर्विसेज, आई हैव नॉट टेकन अ जीएसटी रजिस्ट्रेशन,
ओके,
I have not taken because I know that I will be within that threshold limit. For example,
हाउ विल यू इनवॉइस मी?
I'll raise an invoice which will not carry any GST. I'll say that GST is not applicable to me because I am falling within the threshold limit.
And that's
Because when I raise a bill on IFT, so I have to give a declaration that I am not covered under the threshold limit, so I am not charging any GST.
वो डिक्लेरेशन आपको अपने
हाँ, वो ईयरली एक बार डिक्लेरेशन देना पड़ता है. Fine, that's all.
So one more question.
Okay.
In case of let's say pensioners, do they also have to pay any advance tax?
हाँ, पेंशनर्स को भी हाँ
I'm retired now.
हाँ हाँ मैं बताता हूँ क्या होता है कि अगर आपकी इनकम टैक्स लायबिलिटी 10,000 रुपए से नीचे है, एडवांस टैक्स प्रोविजन आर नॉट एप्लीकेबल. अगर आपकी 10,000 से ऊपर है, आफ्टर मेकिंग ऑल योर सेविंग्स एंड एवरीथिंग, आपने एटीसी की एग्जेम्पशन ली, सब ली, और आपको 15,000 रुपए टैक्स देना पड़ता है, तो आपको वो जो 15,000 थे वो 4 इंस्टॉलमेंट में देने चाहिए थे. जब आप फाइल करते हो, जनरली आपका जो टैक्स कंसल्टेंट होता है वो थोड़ा बहुत इंटरेस्ट लगा के पे कर देता है, आपको पता नहीं चलता, 200-400 रुपए टैक्स मिल जाता है, इंटरेस्ट लग जाता है. हाँ जी, या ये टॉकिंग फ्रॉम द जीएसटी परस्पेक्टिव और इन हाँ okay now tell me that there are many doctors, most of the doctors don't give you a bill unless you demand for a bill.
Most of them
They don't give. So फिर वो
You have to demand, otherwise.
हाँ वो देते ही नहीं है, तो वो फिर वो they don't show that as their income. Okay, so they are escaping the tax liability because of otherwise every person is supposed to, business person, whether he's a doctor or whatever, he has to raise an invoice. Okay, if you are not raising, that means you are not complying with Indian laws. Fine, so you can escape that tax benefit, this thing. So well known है सबको.
So, but as per doctor also he takes a UPI payment.
हाँ
But then
हाँ
you can't escape UPI.
हाँ
How do we account for the GST?
हाँ
Suppose I have a check, I give a membership to someone.
हाँ, तो आपने यूपीआई से पैसा ले लिया ना. When you are depositing the tax and filing your return, you say that whatever money I am collecting, it is inclusive of GST, and deposit that money with the
But
government.
that gets adjusted with my input credit.
Absolutely. अगर आपको इनपुट क्रेडिट मिलता है और नाउ शी इज रनिंग अ कैफे, तो उसको 5% टैक्स देना पड़ता है, उसको इनपुट क्रेडिट टैक्स मिलता ही नहीं है. तो इट डिपेंड्स ऑन केस टू केस.
But
इज दैट
I
ओके?
think you get input credit back.
या हाँ, you are allowed, if your final product is taxable and you are paying full tax, then whatever inputs you are using, you can take the input credit.
And also input credit, he said that all this input in order to be buys.
हाँ, he is going to be paying GST on that, so he is entitled for GST input credit. Okay, sir, let's go to the input credit, which is otherwise we will not be able to cover that, and that's very important. हम वहाँ पहुँच ही नहीं पा रहे हैं. Okay, sir, just hold on for a while. हम input credit पे आ जाएंगे, आपकी सारी problems खत्म हो जाएंगी. No.
जब इनपुट क्रेडिट का ही बता दिया सर, रेस्टोरेंट जो 5% में टैक्स कर रहा है,
हाँ.
वो अपना इनपुट क्रेडिट पे 5% ले लेगा.
नहीं, रेस्टोरेंट को इनपुट क्रेडिट टैक्स का अलाउड ही नहीं होता ना. अभी रुक जाओ सर, अभी आ रहे हैं ना.
तो ले रहा है.
आपसे चार्ज कर रहा है, वो गवर्नमेंट को जमा करा रहा है 5%. ओके, जो सामान खरीद रहा है, मिल्क खरीद रहा है, मिल्क पे वैसे जीएसटी नहीं होता, जिस चीज पे जीएसटी पे कर रहा है वो उसकी कॉस्ट बन जाती है, वो आपको पास ऑन हो जाती है. ओके, जीएसटी ऑफ करंट मंथ इज पेबल बाय 20th ऑफ द फॉलोइंग मंथ. ओके फाइन, हर 20 तारीख को आपको पे करना पड़ता है. अगर आप कॉम्पोजिट सप्लायर हैं तो आप 25 तक पे कर सकते हैं. ओके फाइन, कॉम्पोजिट मीन्स की जो 1.5 करोड़ की थ्रेशोल्ड से नीचे है. ओके ओके, सो आई एम नॉट. अच्छा, जीएसटी इनवॉइस अभी हम इसको स्किप कर देते हैं, आप सीधा वहीं चलते हैं, आपको इनपुट क्रेडिट पे ले जाते हैं. तो there is a tax invoice, there the GST destination based. हाँ, input tax credit. I'm just starting the important one. I'll go back whatever slides I've missed. Okay, which talks about GST invoice and other things. To avoid the cascading effect, input tax credits are available. It is based on VAT concept of the following input tax credits on input services and capital goods. Okay, output supplier of goods and services can avail credit of CGST, SGST, UTGST, and IGST. Okay, fine. output supplier of goods and services can avail credit of CGST, SGST, UTGST, and IGST charged by the input supplier of goods and of services of and capital goods. Okay, fine. Now utilization. अब हम देखते हैं इस मोटी मोटी स्लाइड में क्या था कि जो भी आपने इनपुट क्रेडिट पे करा है that sorry whatever credit I mean GST you have paid at the time of procuring the goods, you can claim it when you are selling the goods to your customer. So that is what it says in nutshell. Okay, don't draw any other conclusion, whatever is it. Okay? Now utilization of credit, this is very important. ये अब मैं सिर्फ यहां तक चलूंगा, उसके बाद 2 स्लाइड मिस कर दूंगा, आपको एग्जांपल दिखाऊंगा तब आपको समझ में आएगा, लेकिन ये दिखाना बहुत जरूरी है. Input tax credit of SGST can be utilized for payment of CGST first, SGST first. तो अगर आपने SGST पे करा था माल खरीदने पे और माल बेचने पे आपने जो SGST पे करना है उसी का ही आप क्लेम कर सकते हो. SGST input can be claimed against the SGST output, ठीक है, and balance for IGST. अगर कुछ बच गया तो फिर IGST. Okay, fine. Input, okay, just listen to it. May not that you may follow 100%, but in example you will follow it completely. Input tax credit of UGST can be utilized for payment of UGST. आपने UGST पे करा था तो UGST जब गवर्नमेंट को पे करे हो उसके अगेंस्ट वो क्रेडिट क्लेम कर सकते हो. सिमिलरली SGST को SGST के अगेंस्ट, लेकिन कुछ बचेगा तो फिर आपको और दूसरे क्लेम मिलेंगे. Input tax credit of CGST can be claimed against CGST. Input tax credit of IGST can be utilized against IGST, CGST and SGST. सिर्फ IGST के अंदर ये रूल है कि इसका जो क्रेडिट है आप किसी के अगेंस्ट भी ले सकते हो, बट इन द ऑर्डर ऑफ IGST, CGST and CGST. Okay. Input tax credit of GST compensation cess can be utilized only against the payment of GST compensation cess. अगर आपने compensation cess पे करा है on those product पान मसाला, आप पान मसाला बना रहे हो तो आपने किसी को रॉ मटेरियल पे सेस पे करा है तो वो सेस जो है आपके उसके अगेंस्ट आप क्लेम कर सकते हो. ओके, नाउ आई एम जस्ट गोइंग टू स्किप एवरीथिंग. ये सिर्फ है कि जो IGST है दैट यू कैन क्लेम अगेंस्ट एनीथिंग, एंड CGST को SGST से क्लेम नहीं कर सकते. सिमिलरली SGST को CGST से क्लेम नहीं कर सकते, आपस में क्लेम कर सकते हैं. सीधा एरो, आपस में क्रॉस यूटिलाइजेशन अलाउड नहीं है. ओके, अब आता है क्वेश्चन नाउ. Okay, provisions. So let's understand everything through an example and then we'll go back to those slides. Intra-state supply. Consider the following cases pertaining to supply within the state of Maharashtra. Assume the rate is 12%. Okay. X of Maharashtra. This is intra-state. That means within the state. Okay. And the GST is 12% and you are selling within the Maharashtra. X of Maharashtra supplies goods or services to Y of Maharashtra. Taxable value of supply is 1 lakh. X does not have any input tax credit. So this is the first in chain. GST will be shown as follows in the invoice. So this is what we have seen earlier. कि ऐसा raise हो जाएगा bill. Is that okay? Fine. This is the first invoice in the chain. X will remit 6,000 and 6,000 to the government on account of CGST and SGST. And the central government of Maharashtra, the money will go to, on account of central government and government of Maharashtra by using single challan. He does not have any input tax. अभी जो पहला invoice था, अब क्या हुआ? Y in the above case supplies the goods and services after making a value addition at the rate of 30%. Now, whether he's manufacturing or he's processing the goods, whatever it may be, so we are not mentioning that, but he's doing some value addition in whatever form. Okay. Recipient of supply is Z of Maharashtra. The goods are remaining within Maharashtra, first case. GST will be shown as in the invoice. Now, taxable value of supply will be 1 lakh plus 30%, 1,30,000. Add GST, which will be 6% on 1,30,000 and 6% on 1,30,000. So, he will be paying both CGST as well as SGST. So, his total invoice will be, he will be charging to Y will be 1 lakh. The amount charged by Y, will be 1,45,600. Is that okay? Okay. Now this is very important. In this case, Y will remit CGST and to the central government and SGST to the Maharashtra government. Tax on output 7,800, 7,100. You can see the upper invoice what he raised. But since he has bought these goods from X, okay, and his invoice carries 6,000 CGST and 6,000 SGST, so now he is going to pay only 1,800 to the government of India. Okay, though he has collected 7,800, 7,800, but since he has paid 6,000 and 6,000 to X, so he has to pay only the balance to the government of India. ये समझ आ गया? यही आपका क्वेश्चन ऐसे ही आ रहा है आगे चलिए. Now statement showing the revenue generated of government. अब गवर्नमेंट का रेवेन्यू देखते हैं. पहले गवर्नमेंट को मिला 6,000 किससे? X से Y को बिका तो उसको 6,000 मिल गया. अब उसको Y से मिला पैसा जब Z को माल गया तो भारत. They got 7,800 and this was the amount which was actually collected by Y on his invoice. तो अल्टीमेटली गवर्नमेंट को 7,800 जा रहा है. जो अल्टीमेटली लास्ट बंदे ने कलेक्ट करा था वो गवर्नमेंट को जा रहा है. इज दैट ओके? इफ इट इज विद इन महाराष्ट्र, ये पहला एग्जांपल है विद इन महाराष्ट्र. अब चलते हैं इंटरस्टेट सप्लाई. नाउ इट इज इंटरस्टेट. कंसीडर द फॉलोइंग केसेस पर्टेनिंग टू interstate supply GST at 12% assumed. X of Bengaluru supplies goods and services to Y of Mysore. Okay. X of Bengaluru supplies goods and services to Y of Mysore. Okay. So Bengaluru and Mysore within the same state. Okay. Taxable value is 5 lakhs. X does not have any input tax credit. पहला chain में. So this is an intrastate supply within the state. Will be shown as follows. तो ये हो गया आपका, क्योंकि विद इन कर्नाटक स्टेट में तो 5 लाख का बिल है, 6% CGST and 6% SGST कर्नाटका. ओके, सो X will remit CGST of 30,000 and 30,000 of SGST to the account of central government and government of Karnataka by using a single challan. He does not have any input tax credit. Now, who was this guy? Y. Y in the above case supplies the same goods after making a value addition at the rate of 40%. The recipient of the supply is Z of Trivandrum. Now the goods are moving out of the state. Okay. अब कर्नाटका से वो चला गया त्रिवेंद्रम, केरला में. Okay. This is an interstate supply. GST will be shown as follows. अब उसने क्या करेगा वो? उसने 5 लाख का माल खरीदा था, उस पर 40% चार्ज करा, तो 7 lakhs हो गया. He is going to charge IGST because the goods are moving from one state to another. There is no CGST, SGST. So he has paid 84,000. So total amount charged by Y will be how much? 7,84,000. Now, in this case, Y will remit IGST to the central government as follows. So he has collected 84,000, but he has paid 30,000 as CGST and 30,000 as SGST. So balance is only 24,000 remaining. He is going to pay that. Karnataka, the exporting state. Who is the exporting state? Karnataka से त्रिवेंद्रम जा रहा है. Will transfer SGST credit of 30,000 utilized on the payment of I to the central government. क्योंकि the goods have actually gone out of Karnataka. So Karnataka, the exporting state, will transfer SGST credit of 30,000 utilized in payment of IGST to central. उसको फिर गवर्नमेंट को पैसा देना पड़ेगा क्योंकि उसके सामान वहां से निकल गया, वहां कंज्यूम ही नहीं हुआ. लेकिन उसका इनपुट क्रेडिट इस बंदे ने ले लिया था. ओके, तो वो अब कुछ करेगा. ठीक है. दिस इज एन इंटरनल ट्रांसफर. द टैक्स पेयर्स ऑफ X and Y आर नॉट सपोज टू मेक एनी एक्शन ऑन दिस अकाउंट. दिस इज गवर्नमेंट टू गवर्नमेंट दिस थिंग बिकॉज द गुड्स earlier the tax was collected in Karnataka, but the goods have been exported, so they are not going to get any revenue. So they are going to pass on to the central government because it's now become a interstate transfer. Okay, fine. Okay, next. Z in the above case supplies the same goods after making value addition of 30%. अब वो चेंज चल रही है. Recipient of supply is A in Kerala. Now Trivandrum to Kerala within the state. Okay, this is an interstate supply within the state of Kerala. GST will be shown as follows in the tax invoice issued by Z. Now 7 lakhs plus 30% value addition, 9,10,000. Add GST, CGST और CST वापस आ जाएंगे क्योंकि now the goods are being sold within the state. So it will be 54,600 and 54,600. So the amount will be charged will be 10,19,200 by Z. Now, in this case, Z will remit CGST to central government and SGST to Kerala government. कितना कितना देना है? You know, ultimately the goods have come and sold in the state of Trivandrum, in the state of what? Kerala. So up 54,000 में से, because since he has paid IGST when he bought it from the earlier state, so he is going to take a credit of 54,600 and 29,400, and he is going to pay the balance on the value addition to the government. Okay, fine. The central government will transfer IGST credit of 29,400 utilized toward SGST payment to Kerala government, because now it's a government, Kerala government will ultimately consume more. So the central government is going to pay back that amount. So this is the amount which is payable. Is that okay? अब हम देखते हैं अल्टीमेटली, देखो लास्ट में जो इनवॉइस रेज करा था वो 54,600 एंड 54,600 का लगा था. अब गवर्नमेंट को अल्टीमेटली कितना मिल रहा है नीचे, विच इज द सम टोटल. सो दिस इज द गवर्नमेंट रेवेन्यू which has passed through various chains. पहले on supply of goods from X to Y, central government and state government got shared the amount. Then on the supply of goods from Y to Z, then the central government got 24,000 because IGST got into. Then transfer by Karnataka government to central government, आपस में transfer हो गया उनका. On supply of goods or services from Z to A, which is the ultimate, so Kerala government got 25,200, and then transfer by central government to Kerala government 29,400. So net the government is getting only the revenue which has been collected at the last point. अब कितनी चेन क्रॉस कर गया वो गुड्स, तो अल्टीमेटली जो लास्ट इनवॉइस था वेयर यू नो दे जो 54,600 ये था, this is the money which the government is going to get. Now which government gets depends upon where the goods are moving from which place to which place. Okay, so बाकी सब जो पेमेंट हुआ था, they were just pass throughs. It passed through from one person to another person, but ultimately the government, got the central government 54,000 and Kerala government, because the goods were ultimately, being sold in the state of Kerala government. So they are going to get 54,600, their share, and central government is going to get, because they are entitled for 50%. क्योंकि एक्साइज ड्यूटी और उनको मिलेगा ही उनका लेवी जो था